In this video, we will show how to do the problems for Module 2 of the SAT Practice Test number 6, published by the College Board. You can find this test at the College Board's website under the paper practice tests. Here's a specific link to that website here. You can also just Google College Board SAT Practice Tests and you'll be directed to that website. That website looks like this when you get on it, and if you scroll down, you'll see some full-length SAT paper practice tests. There's bundles 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. There used to be bundles 1, 2, and 3 as well. And you will find videos for all of these bundles or all of these tests on this YouTube channel. There's a link for all of those in the description of this video. But if you click on bundle 6, you'll see the SAT practice test that we are going over, along with some answers and explanations of those answers. When you open up the practice test, it looks like this. There is a reading and writing portion that I am not covering on my channel. I am covering the math portion only. The math portion starts on page 30 with module 1. There's another video that will be linked to this video that covers the problems in module 1. We're covering module 2, which starts on page 42. On page 42, you can see some formulas, geometric formulas, along with some angles, measurements, some facts about angles, measurements. And then you'll also see on the next page how the SAT practice test wants you to write answers. On page 44, the actual module 2 starts, and that's where we're going to start. Here we go. Question 1. The function f is defined by f of x is equal to 8x. For what value of x does f of x equal 72? We're asking, when does the output equal to 72? Since the output is 8x, when is 8x equal to 72? I can divide both sides by 8. Once I divide the left-hand side by 8, I get x. The right-hand side divided by 8 is 9. And therefore, x equals 9 is the answer to problem number 1. That is answer B. Question 2. In the figure, two lines intersect at a point. Angle 1 and angle 2 are vertical angles. The measure of angle 1 is 72 degrees. What is the measure of angle 2? Well, the measure of angle 2 is also 70 degrees. 72 degrees, excuse me, 72 degrees. The reason for that is because 1 and 2 are opposite angles on an intersecting line. And if you think about it, we know that angle 1 is 72. Well, angle 1 is on this line. So this angle, which I'll call x, plus angle 1 has to add up to 180. And therefore, angle x there is going to be 180 minus 72, so 108. But also, angle 2 is on this line with angle x, so angle 2 plus x has to also add up to 180. So since angle 1 plus x has to add up to 180 and angle 2 plus x has to add up to 180, x has to be 108. And then angle 2 also has to be 72 degrees. Therefore, the answer to question 2 is A, 72 degrees. Question 3. On a street with 7 houses, 2 houses are blue. If a house from this street is selected at random, what is the probability of selecting a house that is blue? So probability of blue, we're going to use classical probability. So that means the number of total outcomes is in the denominator. Since we select one of 7 houses at random, there are 7 different houses that could be selected. If we're looking for the number that could be blue, since 2 of them are blue, our probability of selecting a blue house is 2 out of 7. And that's answer B. So the answer to question 3 is B, 2 over 7. Question 4 says the graph of a function f is shown where y is equal to f of x. Which of the following describes the function? And then it gives us some increasing, decreasing, linear, or exponential. Well, since this is a straight line, this is going to be a linear function. And because left to right, we're moving up. So in other words, as x increases, the y value also increases. Therefore, the answer to question 4 is an increasing linear function. So because we have positive slope, or because as we move left to right, we are increasing, that's increasing function. And because it's a straight line, it's linear. So increasing linear is the correct answer to question 4. And by the way, that's A. Question 5. The graph of the function f is shown where y equals f of x. What is the y-intercept of the graph? Well, the y-intercept is where the line or the graph hits the y-axis. We can see that that's happening right here. I'll try to color in a circle in blue at that point of 0, -4. And therefore, the y-intercept is exactly that point. It's the point 0, -4. That's where our graph crosses the y-axis. So 0, -4 is the answer to number 5, which is option B. Let me erase that. Question 6 says, the solution to the given system of equations is x comma y. What is the value of y? The first equation says x is equal to 8. By the way, that would be a vertical line. That's perfectly fine. So in order for this solution to have a system, the x value has to be 8 on this solution. So we need the point 8 comma y, and now we just figure out the y. In order to figure out the y, we take our second equation, which is x plus 3y equals 26, and we input an 8 for the x. That gives us 8 plus 3y is equal to 26. So now we would subtract 8 from both sides. That would give me 3y is equal to 18. Dividing both sides by 3 gives me y equals 6. So the solution to this system of equations is the point 8 comma 6. But Remember, this is only asking us what is the value of y for the solution. And therefore, y equals 6 is our answer. So our answer we can write as 6. Question 7. The amount of Hannah's bill for a food order was $50. Hannah gave a tip of 20% of the amount of the bill. What is the amount in dollars of the tip that Hannah gave? So basically, if we're trying to find the tip is going to be 20% of the bill. And so all we have to do is take 20% of 50. Now, when we take 20% as we write that, we usually write that as a decimal, 0.20 times the $50. When you do that, you get 10. Or in dollars, it would be $10. So $10 is the tip, and that's the answer to question 7. Question 8. Which expression is equivalent to 5x raised to the 5th power minus 6x raised to the 4th power plus 8x raised to the 3rd power? Those powers are just on the x, not on the coefficients. And as you can see, our options are all factored versions of some polynomial. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the greatest common factor. 5, 6, and 8 don't have any common factors other than 1. So we just need to pull out the greatest common factor, which is going to be x raised to the 3rd power. Once I do that, I end up with 5x squared minus 6x raised to the 1st power plus 8. And you can see that this is the solution that is option B on our list of choices. So B is the answer to question 8. Let's look at number 9. The ratio of the length of line segment XY to line segment ZV is 6:1. If the length of line segment XY is 102 inches, what is the length in inches of line segment ZV? Now, there's a couple of different ways you can write this, but I'm going to write this as a proportion problem. When it says the ratio of XY, make sure, to ZV is 6:1, then think of that as a fraction of XY is 6:1 if I reduce that fraction. But I know that the length of XY is 102 inches, and we're asked to find what is the length of ZV? How many inches is the length of ZV? So let's, I'll put W in for the number of inches because I don't want to use X. X was one of our values. So we'll use W, that hasn't been used yet. And I just have to solve this proportion here. 6/1 is equal to 102 over W. When I cross multiply, W times 6 is 6W. When I cross multiply the other way, 1 times 102 is 102. And then I can divide both sides by 6 to give me that W, which remember was the length of ZV, is equal to 17 inches. So 17 inches, or just 17, because it asks for the length in inches, is my answer. And therefore, A is the correct answer to problem number 9. Question 10 says, which equation has the same solution as the given equation? Now, for this example, there's easy ways to do it and hard ways to do it. I could come up with the solution to the given equation and then find the solutions for all three of these. But what you'll notice is there's another way to do it, a quicker way. We have 7 times the quantity 2x minus 3 is equal to 63. All of these options, A, B, C, and D, have 2x on the left-hand side. If I want to get just 2x by itself, what I would do is I would divide both sides by 7. If I divide the left-hand side by 7, 7 divided by 7 will cancel out. That'll just give me 2x minus 3 on the left-hand side. When I divide the right-hand side by 7, I end up with 9. And therefore, 2x minus 3 equals 9 is an equivalent equation to the one that I'm given. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for 2x. That is option A. So the answer to question 10 is A. Question 11 says, the function f is defined by f of t is equal to 14t plus 9, gives the estimated length in inches of a vine plant t months after Tavon purchased it. Which of the following is the best interpretation of 9 in this context? Well, if you think about it, f of 0 is going to give you 14 times 0 plus 9. I'll just write that. So f of 0 is equal to 9. And remember, the function gives the length, so the output is in inches, of the vine plant t months after Tavon purchased it. So basically, immediately when Tavon purchased this plant, it was at 9 inches. And that is option D. So the answer to question 11 is option D. Just read all 4 of those statements. The estimated length of the vine plant was 9 inches when Tavon purchased it. Question 12 says x plus 2, quantity x plus 2, times quantity x minus 5 times quantity x plus 9 is equal to 0. What is a positive solution to the given equation? Now, basically, this is asking us if we know the zero factor property and how to solve once a polynomial is factored on the left and set equal to 0. If we have a polynomial like this, then each piece could be 0. So x plus 2 could be 0, or x minus 5 could be 0, or x plus 9 could be 0. And that gives us 3 solutions. When you solve this first equation, we'd subtract 2 from both sides. That would give me x is equal to -2. When I add 5 to the middle function on both sides, I get x is equal to 5. And on my right-hand equation, I get x is equal to -9. So subtract 2 from both sides of this first equation, add 5 to both sides of the second equation, subtract 9 from both sides of this third equation. That gives us 3 solutions, and it's asking me for what is a positive solution to the given equation. Well, the only positive solution is x equals 5. Therefore, option C is the option to choose. C is the answer to question 12. Let's read question 13. Brian saves 2/5 of $215 he earns each week from his job. If Brian continues to save at this rate, how much money in dollars will Brian save in 9 weeks? So let's calculate how much Brian saves each week. He saves 2/5 of the $215. So I would take 2/5 and multiply it times 215, giving me $86 that Brian saves each week. How much will Brian save in 9 weeks? Well, that's just going to be $86 times 9, because 9 weeks at $86 is 9 times 86. That's $774. Now, this is asking us just how much money in dollars will Brian save. So the answer is 774. And that's what you type in. You type in 774. So 774 is the answer to question 13. Question 14. A rectangle has an area of 155 square inches. The length of the rectangle is 4 inches less than 7 times the width of the rectangle. What is the width of the rectangle in inches? So the first thing we need to do is state that the area of a rectangle is length times width. And if you don't know that, then it is in the formula section at the front of the practice 6 test, right where all the other formulas are. Let me show that to you. So right there on page 42, we're talking area of a rectangle is length times width. Also, you could have written it as width times length too, because L times W is the same as W times L. So here we go. So we know the area is length times width. We also know that the area is 155. So 155 is going to be the length times the width. Now, the other piece of information that I'm given is that the length of the rectangle is 4 inches less than 7 times the width of the rectangle. So length is equal to 4 inches less. That's going to be a subtract 4. 4 inches less than what? Well, 7 times the width. So the length is the 7 times the width minus 4. Those are the 2 equations I'm going to utilize, and we need to put those together. So what we do is we substitute out the length in the area equation for 7W minus 4. So we set 155 equal to length times width, but instead of length, we write 7W minus 4. That's the substitution process. And then we just solve this equation. 155 is equal to 7W minus 4W. And then I'd probably subtract 155 from both sides. 0 equals 7W minus 4W minus 155. And then I have a couple of different choices. I can use the quadratic formula, or since we have, oh, I misspoke. I apologize. That should have been W squared. So 7W squared once we do W times W. So 7W squared minus 4W minus 155 is equal to 0. Just like the previous problem, when we have something equal to 0, we'd like to have one side be factored and the other side be equal to 0. So let's look for factors that work. I know the lead term should probably be 7W and 1W because that's what's going on. And then I need to look at for factors of negative 155 that when I put them in here will lead me to get a middle value of negative 4. You can do guessing and checking if you'd like. You can also do, there's something called the AC method if you'd like as well. However, the only real options for negative 155 are 31 and 5. And basically, what we want to do is add 31 and subtract 5. That'll give me a negative 155 when I multiply it out. And then if you notice the middle term, we're going to get 7W times negative 5. That's negative 35W. And then we'll have 31W. When I add a negative 35W plus a positive 31W, I get negative 4. So I used guessing and checking with 31 and 5 and the positive negatives. But you can use any other method you know. In fact, you can also use the quadratic formula if you know that. In any case, we have 7W plus 31 is equal to 0, or W minus 5 is equal to 0. We can solve both equations here. This first equation, we'd subtract 31 and then divide by 7, so W would be equal to negative 31 over 7. The second equation would give us W is equal to 5. Now, negative 31 over 7 does not work for a width. A width can't be a negative number on an actual rectangle. And therefore, what's the width of the rectangle in inches? The only number that works is W equals 5. So get rid of this one that doesn't make sense. And W equals 5, width equals 5 is the final answer. So that's the answer to question 14. By the way, there's probably other ways you can do this, but this is the more straightforward algebraic way of doing question 14. Question 15 says, what is the median of the data set shown? Well, the median is the middle value numerically. And in this data set, it's tricky because we're not in numerical order. So I need to put these numbers in numerical order before I can determine the median, or at least do something like that. So notice we have 3 copies of 4, and then we have 2 copies of 5. And then we have 1, 6, and then we have a 10, and then we have an 18. And I'm going to be looking for the middle number in this set. So we're calling number 1 the first number, or excuse me, number 4 the first number. Another 4 is the second number. Third number is another 4. Fourth number is a 5. Fifth number is a 5. Sixth number is a 6. Seventh number is a 10. Eighth number is an 18. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the 2 middle numbers. Since we have an even number of values in this set, the two middle numbers, which are 5 and 5, are going to be averaged. And the average of 5 and 5 is clearly 5. So we know that the median is equal to 5. The middle number numerically in this set is B, 5. Question 16. A right circular cylinder has a volume of 432 cubic centimeters. The area of the base of the cylinder is 24 square centimeters. What is the height in centimeters of the cylinder? So a right circular cylinder has a volume of 432 cubic centimeters. The area of the base of a cylinder is 24 square centimeters. What is the height in centimeters of the cylinder? Now, there's a couple ways you can do this. One way, if you know what cylinders are, it turns out that when we're dealing with cylinders, it's always area of a base times height gives me the value. So if we wanted to do it that way, the volume is equal to area of the base, I'll call that A sub B, multiplied times the height. So since the value is 432 cubic centimeters, and we know that the area of the base is 24 centimeters, we can find the height by just dividing 24 on both sides. And that gives me a height of 18 centimeters if I'm using label. So 18 is the correct answer for question 16. Now, this took me knowing a little bit something about a cylinder in general. So the volume of a cylinder in general is area of the base times the height. If I didn't know that, I could still do this problem using the formula that we have on the cheat part of practice test 6. By cheat part, I don't mean you're cheating, but this is on the cheat sheet section, the reference formula section. And right circular cylinder is this. V equals pi r squared h, but realize that pi r squared is the base of that cylinder. So V equals pi r squared h. We could use that to find the height of the cylinder as well. So we can use those two formulas in conjunction. The volume of the right cylinder is pi r squared h, and the area of the base is, since the base is a circle, the area is pi r squared. Well, since it says the area of the base of the cylinder is 24, we know that the pi r squared part comes out to be 24. And therefore, the volume, which is 432, is equal to, well, pi r squared is just 24, so 24h. I'm replacing the pi r squared with 24. And then we're back here at the original thing, so I can divide both sides by 24 and end up with 18 as the height of this right circular cylinder. So either way we do that, whether we utilize the formula directly or we know this more general broad formula, we come up with A as our answer. So 18 is the answer to question 16. A is the answer to question 16. Question 17. How many distinct real solutions does the given equation have? Now you can do this very fast because normally to solve for x, we'd have to take the positive and negative versions of the square root of negative 841. And if we know things about imaginary numbers and complex numbers, we know that whenever we take a square root of a negative number, we get out an imaginary value. So the imaginary number, I, multiplied times the square root of 841. Square root of 841 is 29. So we get I times 29, or 29 times I, as the positive answer, and then negative 29I as the negative version. So x is equal to 29 times I, or x is equal to negative 29 times I. These two solutions are both imaginary. So when it says how many distinct real solutions does this equation have, the answer is none, 0. So D is the final answer to question 17. There are 0 real solutions. By the way, when you get really good at this, you can see that immediately. Just say, oh yeah, we're going to take the square root of both sides. Square root of negative is imaginary, so there's no real solutions. So D is the answer. Question 18. Line K is defined by y equals 7x plus 1/8. Line J is perpendicular to line K in the xy plane. What is the slope of line J? Now I want to point out something. Y equals mx plus b is the slope-intercept form of a line. So when we're talking about line K, it's already in slope-intercept form, and so it has slope of 7. So the slope of that is 7. Let me just say equal to 7. So the slope of line K is equal to 7. Now we need to figure out the slope of line J. Since it's going to be perpendicular, perpendicular slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. That means if one of them is A over B, then the other is going to be the negative reciprocal. Reciprocal means I flip the numerator and denominator. Negative means I negate the whole thing. So I'm going to do negative B divided by A. So I just got to figure out the negative reciprocal of 7. And it helps to think of 7 as the fraction 7 over 1. That way I can flip it. Therefore, the line that I'm looking for, the line J, so must have slope, which is going to be equal to, well, if we flip it, we get 1/7, and then we have to negate it, which is negative 1/7. So the slope of line J should be negative 1/7, which is obviously B. So the answer to question 18 is negative 1/7 or B. Question 19 gives me a table, and it says the table shows the linear relationship between the number of cars on a commuter train and the maximum number of passengers and crew, P, that the train can carry. Which equation represents the linear relationship between C and P? Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to create a line. I like creating my lines in slope-intercept form. So we got cars versus passengers. I'm going to write this as P as the outcome is equal to some slope times the number X, or excuse me, which is going to be cars. So we'll call cars C. See, I forgot C is used here, plus our y-intercept. In order to find the slope of this line, I would do the change in y values divided by the change in x values between 2 points. And we have essentially 2 points. One is 5,284. The other is 3,174. You could also use 10,559 as one of the points. It doesn't matter. I will use the 2 points that are essentially 3,174 and 5,284. So the output value of the second point minus the output value of the first point divided by the input value of the second point minus the input value of the first point. Like y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, except for using different letters. And if you take 284, subtracting 174, that gives you 110. That's going to be divided by 2. 5 minus 3 is 2. So we get a slope, which is 55. So now I know what's going to happen, kind of. My equation is going to be P is equal to 55 times C plus some B. In order to figure out the B, I can plug in the values for one of these 2 points, or I could also use the value 10,559 and plug that in. So let's go ahead and do that. When the output is 174, the input is 3. 3 times 155 gives me 165. So I get 174 is equal to 165 plus B. Subtracting 165 from both sides gives me 9 is equal to B. And so we get the equation that says P is equal to 55C plus 9. Now that's not quite what we have over here. My C and P are on the same side. My constant is on the other side. And notice it always starts with the 55. So what I'm going to do to make this equation look exactly like one of those top equations is I'm going to subtract P and then subtract 9. If I do that, I end up with negative 9 is equal to 55C minus P. Or in other words, we can write it on the reverse side, 55C minus P is equal to negative 9. So that's the answer. 55C minus P is equal to negative 9. If I look at the options, that's option A for 19. Now, what I did here is the algebraic approach to doing 19. You could have also plugged in each of these 3 points and seen which one of these equations gives you a true statement. That's another way, and that might be faster if you don't know how to create equations of line by using 2 points on the line. So you could have also just plugged in number of cars into C, number of passengers, and then you do that for all three of these points and see which line gives you a true statement for all three of those values. Question 20. If 4 raised to the 8c power is equal to the third root of 4 raised to the 7th power, what is the value of c? The goal here is to write that right-hand side as 4 raised to a power. So what power do I choose? Well, this is a fact about cube roots. Cube roots are going to be third fractions. When I take 4 raised to the 7th power and then I take a cube root, that's going to be a fraction of 7/3 as my exponent of 4. That's just one of the rules of exponents and how it relates to radical signs. So square roots, cube roots, fourth roots. Now that I know this, 4 raised to the 8c power is equal to 4 raised to the 7/3 power. Now I know that 8c has to be equal to 7/3. To solve, I can divide both sides by 8. When I divide both sides by 8, I get c is equal to 7 divided by 24. That's the fraction version of that answer. And that's how I would write the answer if I were doing it. Now, if you insisted on doing a decimal, then you have to reference how the SAT practice test wants you to input your answer. So let's go reference that. By the way, our fraction was totally fine. It was not over 8 characters, so I could have left it. I would leave it as that number. It's not over 8 characters. But it says if your answer is a decimal that's too long, over 5 characters for positive and 6 characters for negative, truncate it or round it at the 4th digit. So that's what we would have to do because our decimal version of 7/24 goes on forever. So we'd have to round it to the 4th digit if we were answering with a decimal. In that case, 7/24, that's something you could just type into a calculator, 0.2917. That's 4 digits, the 2, the 9, the 1, the 7. So 0.2917 is standard rounding for 7/24. I tend to use exact answers when I can, but again, the SAT test says either of those options are legitimate answers. #21, the solution to the given system of equations is x comma y. What is the value of 6 times the quantity x minus 2? Now, if I wanted to, what I could do is I could multiply out everything and simplify out everything before I start combining the two equations using elimination. Or if I wanted to, I could notice that -4 and +4 are opposite coefficients on the quantity y plus 7. Therefore, if I wanted to, I could just add these two equations right now together. This is the elimination method. That would give me 2 copies of the quantity x minus 2 is equal to 117 plus 442. That's 559. Now, again, I could solve this for x if I want and come up with a value for x, or what I could do, which is a little bit quicker, is notice that we're asking not for the value of x, but the value of 6 times the quantity x minus 2. So all I would have to do is multiply both sides of this equation by 3. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 559 is equal to 1677. That's 1,677. And there you go. That's what happens when you multiply both sides by 3. If you wanted that intermediate step, we're taking 3 multiplied times 2 times x minus 2. 3 times 2 becomes 6. And then we're taking 3 times 559. And 3 times 559 comes out to 1,677. So 1,677 is the answer to problem 21. #22. In triangle ABC, angle B is a right angle. The length of side AB is 10 times the square root of 37, and the length of side BC is 24 times the square root of 37. What is the length of side AC? Sometimes, even though we may be able to do this in our head, it is a little bit easier if I have a picture. So I'm going to draw that picture and I'm going to label that, and I'll just import it right here. So there it is. B is the right angle, and then we have A and C as our other two angles. The length of AB, that's one leg of the right triangle, is 10 root 37. The length of BC is 24 times root 37, and we're looking for the side length of AC. Now, in this case, since we have a right triangle, we can utilize the Pythagorean theorem that says a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared, where a and b are the legs of the right triangle, and c is the hypotenuse of the right triangle. So in this case, the one leg will be AB, which has length 10 root 37. So let's replace the letter A in our Pythagorean theorem with 10 times the square root of 37. And then B is going to be the other leg, which is 24 times root 37, because that's the side length of BC. So we get 24 times the square root of 37, and then we're squaring that whole thing. And that's equal to the hypotenuse length squared. And that's what we're trying to find. Now, be careful when typing this in, but we're going to type the left-hand side into the calculator. And when you do that, I'm going to do it all in one step. Hopefully that's not too much. You end up with 25,012 is equal to c squared. In order to find the value of c, we would take the square root of both sides, and I can take the positive square root because the negative square root is not going to give me a length. It's going to give me a negative value. So I want a positive value to symbolize the length. So c is equal to the square root of 25,012. Now this is the answer, but it's not the simplified answer that we're looking for. Notice, by the way, in all of these options, we have 37 underneath the square root. So that's kind of a hint that I should probably divide this number by 37, Or in other words, I need to take C is equal to the square root of something times 37. So take that number 25012 and divide by 37, you get 676. And it turns out we can take a square root of 676. That gives me 26. So I end up with 26 times the square root of 37 as the length of the hypotenuse, that is the length of AC. And that's what we're asking for. What is the length of side AC? The length of side AC is 26 times the square root of 37. And that is option B. So the answer to question 22 is B, 26 times the square root of 37. You'll notice that each of these had a square root of 37 in them. There is a way where you can sort of get rid of that right at the beginning and figure it out via proportions as well. But you still have to use Pythagorean theorem. And just FYI, that Pythagorean theorem is in the reference at the beginning of Module 2, all the reference formulas. But in any case, B is the correct answer to question 22, 26 times square root of 37. Let's look at question 23. The function f is defined by the given equation. The equation can be written as f of x is equal to quantity 1 plus p over 100, all raised to the x power, where p is a constant. Which of the following is the closest value of p? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start by trying to rewrite my f of x. I'm going to write it as 1.84 raised to the x over 4. I'm going to start with the actual expression given. And what I need to know is a rule of exponents called the power rule of exponents, which says I can take and state this is 1.84 raised to the 1/4 power and have that entire expression be raised to the x power. So what I need to do is I need to take 1.84 and raise it to the 1/4 power. What we end up with is 1.1647 roughly raised to the x power. If I wanted to round this to 2 decimal places, it'd be about 1.16 raised to the x power. I'm going to put an approximate value sign there so we know that that 1.16 has been rounded. Now think about what this question is asking. It's asking for what is 1 plus p over 100. That's basically asking for me to rewrite 1.16 as 1 plus 16 over 100. That's 0.16 is 16 over 100 raised to the x power. So what is the closest value of p? Well, the closest value of p is 16. In that scenario. That means the answer to question 23 is 16, which is option A. So A, 16 is the answer to question 23. Question 24. The function f is defined by f of x is equal to a times the square root of x plus b, where a and b are constants. In the xy plane, the graph of y equals f of x passes through the point negative 24, comma 0, and f of 24 is less than 0. Which of the following must be true? Now, it turns out it's kind of easier to use this second equation first. So let's use that second property, that f of 24 has to be less than 0. What is f of 24? Well, when I plug in 24 into my function, I would get a times the square root of x plus b being less than 0. Now, a and b are constants. And if a and b are constants, excuse me, a times the square root of x plus b, x here is 24 since I plugged in 24. A and b are constants. This is the positive square root. So that means that this expression is going to either, well, it's got to be positive. Okay, this expression's got to be positive or imaginary. And we're not using imaginary. We know a and b are constants. So we know a isn't going to be imaginary. So the square root's not going to be imaginary. So they're constant real numbers. And so square root of 24 plus b is going to be positive. So if a times a positive number is negative, that means a has to be negative. A has to be less than 0. Now let's look at the other property. The other property says it passes through the point negative 24, 0. That means when you plug in a negative 24 into the x value, you get a 0 as the output. What that tells me is that a times the square root of, well, we're going to plug in a negative 24 for x. So negative 24 plus b is equal to 0. Now, since a is negative, I can safely divide both sides of this equation by a, and that gives me that the square root of negative 24 plus b is equal to 0. Squaring both sides gives me negative 24 plus b is equal to 0. And that means b is 24. And so now we have two properties, one that says a is less than 0, and the other says b is 24. So a is negative, b is 24. And if we look at our options, options C and D tell us about a and b in relation to each other. Since a is negative, since a is negative and b is equal to 24, that means a is going to be always less than b. No matter what else happens, a has to be less than b. And so D is the option that has to be true. So D is the answer to question 24. Now, if you had any doubts, you could actually check the other options as well and see that they don't make sense. If you plug in a 0, you are not guaranteed to get 24. If you plug in a 0, you are not guaranteed to get negative 24. And then the only two options that are left are these two. And through our deductive reasoning, we see that number A has to always be less than number B. A has to be less than 24. So D is the answer to question 24. #25 In the XY plane, a circle has center C with coordinates h, k. Points A and B lie on the circle. Point A has coordinates h plus 1, comma, h plus square root of 102. And angle ACB is a right angle. What is the length of line segment AB? Now, the interesting part about this is that it's probably easiest to draw a picture. So let's draw a picture, get a visual, see what it looks like. I'm going to do that and then import it right here. All right, so here's the picture. Now I want you to notice that this is a right triangle. So AC and then CB are both the radius of the circle and also the legs of a right triangle. And we're trying to find the hypotenuse of this right triangle since ACB is a right angle. So let's first start by finding the radius. The radius is going to be the distance from A to C. Really doesn't matter what the h and k is. The radius is going to be the square root of the change in x squared plus the change in y squared. And since we can see that the x value changes from h to h plus 1, the x value changes by 1 unit. The y value goes from k to k plus square root of 102. So that is a change of the square root of 102 units. So this is the radius. And when it's all said and done, the radius is the square root of 103. And you can see that is going to be the length of AC and also the length of BC. Now that we use radius of circles to figure that out, the length of AC, now we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem to find the hypotenuse of this right triangle. And again, we've used this before. The Pythagorean theorem says a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared when we have a right triangle with leg length a and b and hypotenuse c. Well, leg 1 of the right triangle is AC, which is square root of 103. So we're going to get the square root of 103 quantity squared plus the other leg length is going to be the BC or CB, however you like to say that. That's going to be the square root of 103 as well. And then we're going to square that B, and that's going to give me C squared. Notice what that tells me is that my C, my hypotenuse, is going to be 206, or I should say C squared is going to be 206. And that means the C is equal to the square root of 206. And the C is the actual length of line segment A to B. And that's our final answer. Square root of 206 is the length of this line segment that I was looking for. So square root of 206 is option A. Question 25, therefore, has answer A of square root of 206. Let's look at problem 26. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so we can see the whole problem. Question 26 says, the scatter plot shows the relationship between two variables x and y for data set E. A line of best fit is shown. Data set F is created by multiplying the y coordinate of each data point from data set E by 3.9. Which of the following could be an equation for the line of best fit for data set F. So this is the line for E. So I'm just going to call that, without messing things up, line E. And what we see is line E has positive slope, and it goes through the point 0, about a little over 10, under 15, looks like about 12. Now, if you think about the slope of this line, going from 0 to 2 goes from about 12 to 15. So we're going up 3 when we went over 2. That means that we have line E, which would be equal to y is equal to about 3 over 2 times x plus about 12. That would be line E. Now, data set F is created by multiplying the y coordinate of each data point, that's the output value of each data point, by 3.9. So what I would do for line F is I would create a new equation where the output would come out of multiplying the y values by 3.9. Since the y values are this entire expression, I would multiply that entire expression by 3.9. Be careful when you do that. That's 3 halves times x plus 12, all in parentheses. And so if we're rewriting line F, that's y is equal to 3.9 times 3 halves. 3 halves, by the way, as a decimal is 1.5. So you get about 5.85-ish times x plus 12 times 3.9 is about 46.8. And remember, these were approximate values for 3 halves, my slope, and my intercept. So it might not be perfect, but we're getting about y is equal to close to 6 times x plus close to 47. And if you look at which options match that, well, the best option that matches that is just changing this, what I called 5.85 to 5.9. And therefore, the answer to question 25 is line A. Y equals 46.8 plus 5.9x, or you could have rewritten that as y equals 5.9x plus 46.8. Again, I got that by taking the outputs, all of the outputs, and multiplying them by a factor of 3.9. Question 27. In the given system of equations, R is a constant. If the system has no solution, what is the value of R? No solution means that we have parallel lines. Now, we can show this in a variety of ways, but parallel lines have the same slope. Let me write that down. So we just need to figure out what value of R would we need to have the same slope. So I'm going to take the first line and I'm going to rewrite it so that it looks a little bit clearer. And in particular, when I take that first line, 48x minus 64y, I'm going to put this line into slope-intercept form so I can easily see the slope. By doing that, what we would have to do is subtract 48x from both sides and then subtract 48y from both sides. When I subtract 48y from both sides, I end up with negative 112y on the left-hand side. When I subtract 48x from both sides, I get negative 48x plus 24. Dividing both sides by negative 112 gives me y is equal to, well, 48 over 112 will simplify to 3/7. And then when we take 24 over 112, or rather 24 divided by negative 112, we would end up with a negative 3 over 14. So that is the line, the first line, rewritten in slope-intercept form. Now let's rewrite the second line in slope-intercept form. We have ry is equal to 1/8 minus 12x. Since slope-intercept form has the x in front, I'm going to rewrite that. I'm going to write that as negative 12x plus 1 over 8. And then divide both sides by r. That gives me y is equal to negative 12 divided by r multiplied times x plus 1 divided by 8r. Now, for us to have parallel lines, these two lines have to have the same slope. The slope is the coefficient of x in slope-intercept form. So for these two lines to be parallel, 3/7 has to be equal to negative 12 over r. And we can solve this. In fact, let me put the negative with the 12 all in the numerator. We can solve this easily by using cross multiplication. 3r is equal to 7 times negative 12. That's negative 84. Dividing both sides by 3 gives me an r value of 28. Oh, excuse me, negative 28. I misspoke there. So there you go. If these two lines have no solutions, if this system of equations is such that the system has no solutions, then the lines are parallel, and that means the slopes are the same, and that means r has to be negative 28. So negative 28 is the answer to question 27. So that concludes Module 2 of the SAT Practice Test number 6, published by the College Board. If you want to look at the answers to Module 1, there's a video on that that will be linked in this video. And there are other practice tests as well. A full playlist of the practice tests will eventually be linked in this video as well.